Tonight, as we are moving through the last hours, and that's what we've been doing over the last few weeks in our look at the Gospel of John, we're moving through the last hours of Jesus' life just before his crucifixion. And I'd like to look at tonight his time before Pilate. Last time I was with you 2 weeks ago, we looked at his time before Annas and then Caiaphas and what happened with Peter's denial. But tonight I want us to look at the first part of his time with Pilate, ending chapter 18, beginning in verse 28, going through verse 40. And then I want us to pick up next week, Lord willing, and look at the last bit of his time in chapter 19, that he is before Pilate and what happens on that occasion. But Pilate knew that the Jews had brought Jesus before him out of envy. And even though he knew that, Matthew and Mark both tell us that, even though he knew that, we find him playing a part in this trial, a part that he does not relish. Yet it seems to be a part that he did not think he could get himself out of, or at least he did not try. And being the type of man he was, Pilate is someone who failed to do the right thing. So as we listen to his words and watch his actions and how Jesus speaks to him and the thing that Jesus says to him, the question I have for you tonight is, as we go through this lesson, is this. I want us each to ask ourselves, where do I stand when it comes to Jesus? What are the choices I am making concerning his role in my life? And whether or not I am following him as I should. So let's look at what happens here. As you remember from our previous studies, the leading priest there in Jerusalem wanted Jesus dead. As a matter of fact, if you go back to John chapter 11, and this is brought out in our reading tonight, there's a statement that is made by Caiaphas that it was necessary that one man die for the nation, and he was speaking about Jesus there. They wanted him dead. And yet, that death sentence, though his time before Annas and his time before Caiaphas, they had determined he must die. They knew that the only way he could die was if the Romans in charge gave that order, an execution order. And the individual that would have to come from was the person who was presently reigning over Judea. Some 4 years ago, prior to this event, that man had been appointed as military governor of Judea by the Roman Emperor Tiberius. You know him as Pilate. And Pilate is the one that they bring Jesus before. They bring him before his military headquarters, a place that is known, and we read in the scriptures, as the Praetorium. And it's early in the morning, that Friday morning, but they would not go inside. What we find is that they refused to go inside, and the reason they refused to go inside is because they did not want to ritually defile themselves and thus be unable to eat the Passover. So they stayed outside, and they had Pilate come to them, which was not something he relished. But Pilate was forced to have his judgment seat moved outside so that he could speak with them. And there's an important bit of irony that John includes for us here as he gives us this information. Here is what it is. The Jews, these Jewish authorities, took these elaborate precautions in order to prevent themselves from being contaminated ritually and therefore, according to the law, not being able to eat the Passover. And yet, what we find is at the same time, they're busy manipulating that same legal system in order to bring about the death of the one who was himself the Paschal Lamb, the Passover Lamb. John brings that out, kind of writes it in. As you think about it, that's what he's doing. And their scruples, this is the Jewish scruples, require Pilate to keep going back and forth because he's having to come out to them. They won't come inside the Praetorium, so he's coming out to speak with them, and then he goes back inside and speaks with Jesus. And then he'll come back outside and speak with them. So let's see how this plays out. They bring Jesus to him. Jesus asked a question. What accusation do you bring against this man? That is the question that opened the formal proceedings, if you will. Now, the interesting thing about it is the fact that Pilate had sent Roman troops to the garden, Roman cohort to the garden with the Jewish temple police, if you will, lets us know that Pilate already had an indication of what was going to take place. He already knew something about this man Jesus, already knew that he had been arrested. And no doubt the chief priests who brought Jesus before Pilate expected him just to confirm their judgment and sentence him to death by crucifixion. But he doesn't do that. No, what Pilate does is he orders, basically with this question, he orders a fresh hearing concerning these matters in his presence now. I mean, they've had their chance, both with Annas and with Caiaphas. Now you're in front of me. You're going to operate on my turf. Their reply, kind of a terse reply, if you'll notice, if this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. What's that tell you? They're frustrated with Pilate. This should be over. We could have this already done with if you just work with us here. And in essence, what they're saying is, we would not have wasted our time in bringing him to you if we were not sure that this man was guilty. Just go ahead and just sign off on it and we'll have it done. But no, that's not what happens. So what we find, Pilate turns around and he says to them, take him yourselves. Judge him according to your law. Now, Pilate knew that they wanted him to sentence Jesus to death. And yet, if they were going to waste his time in talking about generalities as it came to their law and about law breaking, then as far as he was concerned, you can take the matter back to your own courts. You can work it out there. I don't have time for this. And on the other hand, if they expected him to hand down a capital sentence, then they were going to have to stop, take the time to explain to him the charges and why he was deserving of death. And so they readily acknowledged, if you'll notice there in verse 31, that they were not permitted to put anyone to death. Now, there in verse 32, John does something. John tells us that this statement served to guarantee that when Jesus was finally sentenced to death, that he would be executed by crucifixion, not by stoning. You see, the Romans were the only ones who had this to sanction capital punishment. Nobody else could do it. The Jews couldn't do it. Why? Because they were living in occupied territory. The Romans were occupying Judea. They controlled that territory, and they controlled what happened here. And when John tells us this, he also adds something else there in verse 32. He said that this was to fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die or was going to die. And when John says this, he's referencing back to something that Jesus had said earlier in that same week. If you go back to John chapter 12, there in verse 32 of that chapter, what Jesus had said to his disciples is this, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. Well, what was he referring to? The type of death he was going to die. Because if you read the very next verse there, chapter 12, verse 33, what John tells us is this, but he was saying this to indicate by what kind of death he was to die. It's not going to be by stoning, it's going to be by crucifixion. So what does Pilate do? Pilate goes back inside, or he goes and begins to speak to Jesus. And he asked him a question. Are you the king of the Jews? Now, this question is found in all four of the Gospels. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus had claimed to be the Messiah, the Son of God. He had never said in the Gospels, I am the king of the Jews. I am the Messiah. I am the chosen one. He acknowledged that. Never king of the Jews. But the Jewish authorities knew that if Pilate is going to act on our behalf, if Pilate is going to sentence him to death, we cannot bring a charge based upon our theology, based upon our understanding of Scripture. We have got to bring a charge against Jesus that will stand up under Roman law. And so a king, someone professing to be king here, would be seen as a rival to Roman authority, so that would be something that would work. They wanted Pilate to see just how dangerous Jesus was so that they could get the death penalty. Many of the Jews expected the Messiah to be the promised king of Israel. If you go back to the beginning of John's gospel, there's a gentleman that's brought to Jesus by the name of Nathanael. And when Nathanael comes to him, what he says to Jesus is, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel, there in verse 49 of John 1. So there were others that believed the Messiah is none other than the king. He is of the lineage of David, therefore he is going to be a king. And Jesus, when it comes to Pilate and the question that Pilate has put before him, are you the king of the Jews? He can't answer that with a simple yes or no. Yes, I am, or no, I'm not. Unless he knows what Pilate means by the question. And so, what he says to Pilate is, are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me? What he's asking Pilate is this: is the question you're asking me a question that rises out of your own understanding and your own curiosity about me, or is your question a question that is based upon something that the Sanhedrin has simply charged me with, something that someone else has just told you and you're working off of that? Because based upon your answer, that determines how I'm going to respond to you. Well, when Pilate says to Jesus this next statement, I am not a Jew, am I? What he is in effect saying, Jesus, is, listen, any royal pretensions that you or anyone else may have mean nothing to me personally. I don't care about you. I'm here on behalf of Rome. That's all I care about. And there is no way that I can seriously consider such claims, because there is no way you're going to overcome Rome. But Pilate also points something else out to him, which Jesus knew. Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. Your people have brought you to me. It's not my people. It's not my soldiers that have brought you. It's your people. And so something I think we are to read between the lines that John is bringing out is this. It is that Pilate isn't satisfied with the charges that the Sanhedrin has brought against Jesus. There's got to be something more to this, more that's behind the animosity that they have toward him. Why are they so anxious to see him dead? He's one of their own people. He's from their own nation. And Pilate knows these authorities. He knows these chief priests. He's had many dealings with them over the last 4 years. And he knows they're not going to take such pains with somebody that's just bent on bringing harm to Rome unless their own interests are at risk. And so it prompts the second part of that question. After telling them that your own people have brought you before me, your chief priests have delivered you to me, he asks the question, what have you done? What is it that you've done that would cause them to want to bring you here before me and me issue a death sentence upon you? And with his answer, Jesus not only begins to confirm that he is a king, but he also begins to describe to him the nature of his kingdom. Look at what he says here in verse 36 of chapter 18. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Do you get what Jesus is saying? If I were going to be a king, if I were going to try to establish a throne here in Jerusalem and rule over this former kingdom, then my followers would rise up. My people would marshal themselves and begin to fight to keep me from having been arrested, but also to begin trying to overthrow Rome. And if you remember, that's exactly the thing that did not happen. Because what did Jesus do? If you remember in the garden when they came to arrest him and Judas came to identify him as Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus is the one that walks right out to them and he asks them, who is it you're looking for? Twice he asked the question. And he twice tells them, I am. I'm the one. Not only that, if you will remember when Peter drew his sword to cut off the ear of Malchus, the high priest, tried to kill Malchus, he only caught the ear. What did Jesus tell him to do? Put away your sword. Put it back in its sheath. All that live by the sword will die by the sword. And then he proceeds to tell his disciples, as we pointed out a couple of weeks ago, that his father, all he had to do was ask, his father would put at his disposal 12 legion or 72,000 angels. So as Jesus is saying, no, my kingdom is not of this world. It's not from here. My kingdom finds its origin elsewhere. It's not defended by the world's means. It's not defended by force. It's not defended by fighting. And the fact that Jesus' kingdom is not of this world does not mean a couple of things, though, and I want you to hear this. It does not mean, when he says, my kingdom's not of this world, it does not mean that his kingdom is not active in this world. His kingdom is very much active in this world. Nor did it mean that his kingdom would have nothing to do with this world. His kingdom is to grow within this world. No, Christ's kingdom is to affect this world in a way that it cannot be opposed, folks, by might. It cannot be opposed by sword or any type of armament. It cannot be opposed by physical fighting. Why? Something John said in his first epistle, toward the end of it, 1 John chapter 5, verse 4. John said there, for whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And then he adds to that statement, this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Everything that stands against God, if you remember when we've been talking about the world, it's all of that which stands opposed to God. And what does Jesus say overcomes that which is opposed to God? He said, or what does John say? It's our faith. Our faith. Faith is the victory we often sing that overcomes the world. So, if we're going to change the world, if you and I are going to change Waverly, Tennessee, if we're going to change Humphreys County, if we're going to change El Salvador, it's going to be through the faith that we proclaim, that we live out every day on a daily basis, the way we act around others as we portray Christ before them. That's what overcomes the world. It's not physical force. Never will be. The church has always grown in the midst of physical force, abundantly. And so Christ's kingdom is to affect the world. What does Pilate come back and do? He says, so you are a king. And this response that Jesus gives to Pilate is an affirmative response. It's brought out. Several of our translations bring that aspect out when you look at the original language. The New American Standard, the New King James, and the NIV. The New American Standard is, I've got it here, you say correctly that I am a king. The New King James says, you say rightly that I am a king. The NIV says, you are right in saying that I am a king. Now, in his previous response, what Jesus had done is he had talked about the kingdom. He described his kingdom in a negative way. How his kingdom is not of this world. Now what he does is he defines his kingly mission in a positive way. And if you look at what he says in verse 37, it's this, for this, what is it? To be a king. So you are a king. For this I have been born. For this I have come into the world. As a king, he tells us that he came to testify to the truth. So when you put these things together, what is he telling us? It is that his kingdom is a kingdom of truth. And it reveals, it is a truth that reveals God in his Son, who himself is truth. Remember what he says to his disciples there at the Last Supper? I am the way and the truth and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. So he is not only one who came into this world to be king over his kingdom, he is also one who came to reveal truth, and that truth is a revelation of how God would respond in our world. But he adds something to that. If you notice the end of verse 37, he says this, everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice, listens to me. How does Pilate respond to that? Simply, one question. What is truth? We could spend an entire hour or longer talking about that, but I'm not here to do that tonight. You see, this last statement which Jesus has just made to him, everyone who is of the truth hears my voice, it forces Pilate to recognize something. That Jesus is the victim of a plot that's been devised by these Jewish authorities to get rid of him. And through his words, what Jesus is also doing is he's giving Pilate the opportunity to align himself with those who are of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate, are you listening? Are you hearing what I'm saying? But Pilate is uncomfortable with those words. If you'll notice what Pilate does, is he immediately cuts off this interrogation with a cynical question. What's truth? And he turns and he walks out. Instead of staying there and listening for an answer or really trying to come to terms with who Jesus is and what this is he's teaching, I think Jesus might have even been getting under his skin just a little bit. But Pilate walks out. And yet, when he does walk out, look at the verdict he gives. I find no guilt or fault in him. If he had stood by that verdict, his words indicate that he understood enough concerning the nature of Jesus' kingdom to realize this man's not a threat to Rome. This man is not someone I need to be worried about or that Rome needs to be worried about. If Pilate had been a man of integrity, the trial would have ended right there. He would have dismissed the charges, released Jesus, and sent the leaders of the Jews away. Matter concluded. Nothing left to do. But for whatever reason, and we're not given, only Pilate will know that, for whatever reason, what he did was to appeal to an annual custom that he had to release someone at Passover. And notice the way he framed the question. Do you wish then that I release for you the King of the Jews? Pilate knew, because he had listened to Jesus, my kingdom is not of this world. But they had brought Jesus to him. He claims to be a king. And so what is Pilate doing? He's kind of sticking the knife in and twisting it a little bit. You call him a king? You claiming he's a king? I tell you what, I'll just release this king. Seems to indicate that he's still trying to antagonize them just a little bit. What do? All four gospel writers mention this next individual's name, Barabbas. Barabbas is from two words, Bar-Abbas. Bar meaning son of, Bar-Jonah, Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon son of Jonah. Abbas, Abba, father, son of the Father. So this man is described, he's touched on in each of the four Gospels. Matthew calls him a notorious prisoner. Mark and Luke both identify him as someone who'd taken part in an insurrection that had recently taken place there in Jerusalem and had even killed someone in the process. And John tells us that he was a robber. So this is not a good individual. The chief priest would normally have had nothing to do with this individual, because being an insurrectionist, a zealot, someone that had taken part in an armed rebellion. But on this occasion, because they want Jesus dead more than they want this man to stay in prison. So what do? Not this man, give us Barabbas. We want Barabbas. And so they called out for the release of a man who had committed murder in rebellion against Rome, and they're calling out for the death of a man who they had falsely accused of being a danger to Rome. If you're Pilate and you're standing there watching this play out, what suddenly hits you like a ton of bricks? These people are inconsistent. They are inconsistent. They have only one goal here. They don't care for justice. They want this man dead. And whatever it takes, that's all they're going to have. They want him dead. Now next week we'll see where Pilate goes from here. There's some other things that happen because he's still trying to release Jesus, thinking maybe I can do a few other things to appease them and they'll let go of this. We'll see how that plays out. But tonight I would like for you to reflect on what Jesus said to Pilate back in verse 37 concerning the nature of his kingdom. You say correctly that I am a king. For this I've been born. For this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And as I said earlier, before turning and walking away, Pilate asked the question, what is truth? On another occasion, when many of the disciples that were following Jesus had turned and walked away, recorded for us back in chapter 6 of this same gospel, Jesus looks at his 12 and he asks them a question. You do not want to go away also, do you? And on that occasion, Peter spoke up, and we find it in John chapter 6, verses 68 and 69, and he says this, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. The question for each of us tonight is pretty simple. What will we do with Jesus? What will we do with Jesus? We have a song that talks about what will you do with Jesus? The question comes to you, and you must give an answer for something you must do. Will we, like the Jewish authorities, reject him because he rejects or he threatens our self-righteousness? We like our religion just the way it is. We don't want him challenging it at all. Will we, like Pilate, walk away from him because he makes us uncomfortable? He challenges us to accept him, to follow him, and to live for him. Or will we, like Peter, come bowing before him because we know in our heart of hearts there's no place else to go. There's no one else in all the world that can provide for me what he offers. That's the question. What will we do with Jesus? I can't answer it for you. I can only answer that question for me. But tonight, maybe you're a person that knows I need to come to Christ. I'm not his. I don't belong to him. I've never obeyed the gospel. I've never submitted to his will in my life. I'm still living for me. And if that's you, I encourage you tonight not to put it off any longer. Make the decision tonight. No longer will I live for me. Tonight, my life stops and his begins because I want to live for him. And you're willing to confess him before this body of believers. You're willing to turn away from your sin and be buried with him in baptism and let him wash away those sins so that you can start anew. And maybe you're here tonight and you're a Christian. You've worshiped with us for years. But you also know I've worn the title, but I haven't lived up to the life. I want to make a difference. I want to start doing what he wants me to do. If we can help you in either case, maybe we just need to pray with you. We're here to do that. If you need to respond, won't you come as together we stand and sing?